Okay. All right. Well, yeah, well, so it's a 120 plus. It just depends. And, so if I combine, it's a floating target. I think the book is called The 120 Greatest Bible Stories. But, yeah, we'll see how close I am to the count in the end. Well, Boker Tov, and good morning and welcome to all those who are joining us, who are here in person, and those that are joining us via our YouTube channel, St. Paul Lutheran Church of Hammond. If this is your first time joining us, my name is Reverend Lewis Bolt. I'm the pastor here at St. Paul Lutheran Church, and we're glad you found us and can join us this way. We give thanks to God for the gift of technology that enables us to do this. Whoops, that should be the right button. Oh, what's going on there? All right, we got zoomed in on the bricks. A good close-up of the bricks. I'm not sure what happened there. All right, there we are. All right, so we're doing a Bible study called the greatest stories of the Bible, greatest Bible stories. I switch the title up all the time, so just to cause confusion and chaos. But today we're going to continue in 1 Samuel. Remember, in the Hebrew Bible, Samuel is just one big book, and in our English Bibles, why, I don't know, but they split it off into 1st and 2nd Samuel, just maybe make it a little easier for people. I'm not sure what the situation was, but in any event, we're going to continue our study of another story that we've met some characters already. We're all familiar with King Saul, the first king of the Israelites, the earthly king of the Israelites. The first king, the true king, is Yahweh, but he's their earthly king. We learned already that God is going to take the kingdom away from Saul, and he's going to give it to this boy, who's son of Jesse, the youngest son of Jesse, whose name is David. Samuel has anointed him with oil. He's now going to be the next king of the Israelites. And last week, we heard of the great battle, the battle between David and Goliath, and how David slew the giants. Remember, Goliath is 9.5 feet tall. He's of the uncircumcised Philistines, and David defeated him in battle. Now, today we're going to pick up with the story, the narrative of the story with David and Samuel. So today's Bible story is entitled David and Jonathan, and it's from 1 Samuel chapter 18 to 20. I think I misspoke there earlier. So it's not David and Samuel, it's David and Jonathan from 1 Samuel. So I apologize for that. But let us begin with a word of prayer. This is Luther's prayer for growth. Help us to grow in the knowledge of your dear Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, and to remain firm in the confession of his blessed word. Give us the love to be of one mind and to serve one another in Christ. Then we will not be afraid of that which is disagreeable, nor of the rage of Satan, the arsonist, whose torch is almost extinguished. Dear Father, guard us so that his craftiness may not take the place of our pure faith, grant that our cross and sufferings may lead to a blessed and sure hope of the coming of our Savior, Jesus Christ, for whom we pray daily. In his name, amen. All right, so let's pick up with 1 Samuel chapter 18 and 20. And as we've done periodically, I'll stop to maybe explain something if I think it needs to be explained. This part of the narrative is fairly straightforward, but so let's just pick up at chapter 18. So as soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Now remember, earlier we had that Semitic conclusion, that wrap-up, that said that David left his father's household and was in the service of Saul from that day forward. We learned last week that he was kind of going back and forth a little bit, but now it's going to be the permanent in-residence service. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul was successful, and went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul sent him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So let's stop there. We've skipped over a couple chapters as we've been moving through this. So Jonathan, just to fill in some blanks, Jonathan is Saul's son. He's the heir apparent to the throne, right? So if a king has a son, the firstborn son would be first in line to take over his father's throne when he dies. So Jonathan is apparently the heir apparent to, from a human perspective, I should say. From a human perspective, Jonathan is the heir apparent to the kingdom of Israel. Now notice that when David defeats Goliath, and after he's done talking with King Saul, Jonathan, Saul's son, the heir apparent to the throne, is knit to David. They have this bond with one another. Now, so just be prepared. I don't know if you guys do any social media, but sometimes when there's a long post coming or some type of rant coming, someone might say, be prepared, right? Rant ensuing in near future, or a long post, something along those lines. But, so, be prepared. Now, there is a verse in 2 Samuel chapter 11, chapter 1, verse 26, which I'm going to read for you in a moment. And people who are, I would say, maybe hostile toward the Scriptures, take this verse that I'm about to read and use it in an unseemly manner. Okay? Now, the reason I read this first, so that when we go to read that, we can understand what it really means. Okay? So, Jonathan's soul was knit to David. They didn't literally get out the darning needles and knit their souls together, right? This is a bond that they have. So remember that Jonathan is a man of war. He was there at the battle site with Goliath along with the rest of the army. And what were the Israelites doing? Their knees were knocking and their thighs were quivering in fear of Goliath. And David, this young lad, goes out and slays Goliath with a single stone in a sling. Now, you would imagine, right, that that's a life-changing event. And so Jonathan, for whatever reason, Jonathan is I'm going to use a word that I'm trying to think to avoid using the word because but Jonathan is drawn to David. Let's put it that way, drawn to David, and they have this immediate bond and connection. Now, what does Jonathan do in the reading? He gives his robe, which would presumably be a royal garment, and he gives it to David. The heir apparent to the throne gives him his robe, right? This would be a sign of honor and respect. And not only does he give him the robe, he also gives him all of his armor, right? So Jonathan gives David all of his personal armor, and now David is going to go out from this day forward and be King Saul's, what we might call commander-in-chief, right, of his armed forces. And so their souls were knit together. They have this close personal connection with each other. And we also learned that they made a covenant with one another. That Jonathan, we don't know the details of it right here, but Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. Right? So they entered into this close personal friendship and relationship. Now, let's go look at 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 26, which I will get to in a second and read for you so you don't have to necessarily jump there. All right. So Jonathan, at this point, Jonathan dies. King Saul's son dies, and he was killed in battle against the Philistines. And this happens sort of at the funeral, if you will. Verse 26, David says, I am distressed for you, referring to Jonathan, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant have you been to me. Your love to me was extraordinary, surpassing the love of women. All right, now it's this verse that people will use to speak unseemly and untowardly things about David and Jonathan's relationship. Okay, earlier in 1 Samuel, we read that their souls were knit together. They had this close personal friendship and relationship with each other. And so when David says at Jonathan's funeral, he says, your love to me is extraordinary, surpassing the love of women, it does not mean that they were having a physical relationship with one another. Now, believe it or not, as strange as that might seem, that is out there, as they say, that Jonathan and David had a homosexual relationship. But it doesn't mean that he loved him the way that David loved women, physically, right? The love that they shared with one another was a different kind of love than David had with his wives and other women, okay? It was a stronger love and of a different nature. That's what he's talking about, all right? Let's jump back to chapter 18, in the beginning there. So they have this, David defeats Goliath in battle, and Jonathan gives him his robe, he gives him his personal armor, and they enter into this covenant with one another, this agreement with one another, sort of a, today, what's a BFF stand for? Oh my goodness. Best friends forever, right? Best friends forever. That would be the acronym for best friends forever. All right, so your BFF is your best friend, supposedly forever. Now, if you've ever had a best friend forever, I want to know if you're still friends with your best friend forever. Most of us, we use that term loosely, right? Our real close friends, but the truth is our friends, as we move on in life and our friends move on in life, sometimes we move apart from one another. But David and Jonathan are going to have this extra special relationship with each other throughout the days of their life from this time forward, okay? So, now David is going to go out, he's going to be successful in battle. So not only did he defeat Goliath, but now every time that Saul sends him out as the commander-in-chief, David is going to have a victory. David is going to prosper over the enemies of God. Now, why is that? It's not because David is a super great soldier and strategist. It's because God is with him. Remember that when Samuel anointed David with oil, the Holy Spirit left Saul and came on David and is within him all the days of his life. Right? So every time David goes out to do battle, God is the one going with him. God is the one giving him the victory. Now, to the people, what does it look like? David is the guy getting the victory, right? As we'll see. So, because God is with David, David is now going to be rising in stature in the midst, in the presence of the people. So it is good in the sight. So notice that verse, 5b. And this was good. It was tov in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So David is going to be rising in stature amongst the people and amongst Saul's servants. He already has this close personal relationship and connection with Jonathan, Saul's son, but now it's going to spread. As they were coming home, we don't know where they were, so we have a little change in sort of setting, if you will. As they were, maybe this is coming from a battle. As they were coming home when David returned from striking down the Philistines, the women came out of all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000. And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. So notice that this stature of David rising in stature, it's spreading, not only in the royal court, but also amongst the people. When they go out to battle, David is getting all the credit. And Saul is what? He's a little jealous. And he's a little upset. You know, if you're concerned about your power base, right? If you're a political leader who's concerned about your power base, you keep your eyes on anybody who's growing in stature in the eyes of your people. And this is why Saul was eyeing, keeping his eyes on David from that day forward. Saul's upset because, he went out to battle, he's defeated the Philistines, but now David's getting all the credit. Okay? And he's bothered by that. But the women were singing and dancing, they were coming back in victory, right? And they were out in front of King Saul and his army, and they were singing the praises of David. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre. And as he did day by day, Saul had his spear in his hand. So let's just stop there for a moment. We've encountered this before. Remember that when the Spirit of God left Saul, an evil spirit would assail him periodically and cause him grief, and such that he couldn't find peace and comfort. And so one of his servants suggested that they find someone who's skilled in music playing to soothe Saul's soul. And they talked about David, and that's how David was brought into the household of King Saul to serve this purpose. Now previously, prior to this, when David played, Saul was what? He was soothed, right? The evil spirit would leave him. But now, notice what's happening. As David rises in stature, and maybe Saul is kind of diminishing, if you will, in stature, in the eyes of the people, this evil spirit was causing more and more rage within King Saul, and nothing that David did soothed King Saul anymore. Now notice that King Saul, when he sits on his royal throne, has what in his hand? His spear. Okay. Now, a spear is not only a weapon, it's also a symbol of power. Right? It might be subliminal, right? Trying to tell people, I'm the one in charge, I'm the one in power, right? But day by day, this evil spirit would plague Saul, and David couldn't soothe his soul. As Saul had a spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. So there's David in the royal court, playing the lyre. So we don't know if he's standing nearby, sitting, whatever the case may be. But Saul pulls up his sword, spear rather. Sorry, that got a little loud there because I'm the speaker. And he hurls it at David, trying to do what? Trying to pin him to the wall. Now, if you're trying to pin someone to the wall, you're not aiming for what? The loose clothing. You're aiming for body parts, right? And so Saul is trying to do harm to David, and presumably it's because of the effects of this evil spirit, but also because of Saul's feelings and attitude toward David, right? So it wasn't just a single solitary event. David evaded him twice. So either Saul sent a servant to get the sword, or Saul got up and went, Saul got up and went and got the spear and tried to do it again, right? So this wasn't a single solitary thing. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him but had departed from Saul. So Saul realizes that things have changed with his relationship with Yahweh. He's coming to see how Yahweh is favoring David as the preferred person, and how he's no longer that person in the eyes of God. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. So now David is no longer going to be in the presence of God. He's going to be out with dwelling with the troops, right? So it's sort of a demotion, if you will, in the sense of he's no longer the commander-in-chief. Now he's just a commander over 1,000. and he's going to be outside the royal court. He's going to be, dwelling in tents, kind of thing. So Saul removes him from his presence, and he went out and came in before the people. Now David is doing what Saul sent him to do, which is to, anytime the Israelites go off into battle, David is out there leading the troops. He's fighting in the battles, and as a result, what do the people see? They see David. Now, who is supposed to be leading the troops? The king, right? Saul's supposed to be leading the troops, but what they see is David. So this, as we look at the story, we might realize and recognize this is a tactical error on Saul's part. But, nevertheless, and David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. Yahweh was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. So you get the picture, right? So you almost get the idea that Saul is kind of staying back in the castle. It's not a castle the way we think of castles, but in the royal court. He's not going out with the troops anymore. He's letting David do the bulk of the work, and what the people see is that every day. So if you see a particular person going into let's say you see Harold going into the front door of the White House every day. Walks right through the gates of the White House, walks in the front door of the White House every day. What might you start to think after a while? Harold's the president, right? Because that's where the president is. Or he has a high position of authority, right? Just to give us a sort of a modern day illustration of this. So David is growing in stature in the eyes of the people, and everyone is awestruck by David because he's having success in all of his undertakings. And Saul was becoming more and more afraid. Right? If you want to maintain your power position and you're hanging on with all you got and it's still dwindling out, you might start to become concerned. Right? And this is what's happening to Saul. He has fearful awe of David. All right, so now, even though Saul has this fearful awe of David, Saul is still going to try to get David in the end. So then Saul says to David, here's my elder daughter, Merab. I will give her to you for a wife. Only be valiant for me, and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul thought, let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. And David said to Saul, who am I, and who are my relatives, my father's clan in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king? But at that time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel, the Meholithite, for a wife. So, what does Saul try to do with David? He tries to marry him into his family unit. So maybe I can influence David through my daughter, is the thinking. But David says, well, who am I to be part of the king's household? Who am I to be married to be the son-in-law of the king? And so he begs off, he defers, if you will, to his stature, right? So not physical stature, but his societal stature, saying, look, your daughter's a princess. She should marry someone who's well-to-do, not me. So Saul's plan doesn't work. He wants him. Now notice the intrigue. Saul is well aware of the people's opinion of David. So if he rises up against David, he's already tried to pin him to the wall with his spear twice. If he rises up and kills David, what is he concerned about? The people may rise up against me, right? So he says, okay, let the Philistines do my dirty work, right? So he wants them to go out and battle, be valiant against their enemies, the Philistines. Now, Saul's daughter, Michal, loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Saul thought, let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore Saul said to David a second time, you shall now be my son-in-law. And Saul commanded the servant, speak to David in private and say, behold, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now then, so if you feel like you're being buttered up, be careful, you might be stuck in an oven, right? Now then, become the king's son-in-law. And Saul's servants spoke those words in the ears of David. And David said, does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, since I am a poor man and have no reputation? And the servants of Saul told him thus, and so did David speak. Then Saul said, thus shall you say to David, the king desires no bride price except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged of the king's enemies. Now Saul fought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines, and when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law. Before the time had expired, David arose and went along with his men and killed 200 of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, which were given in full number to the king, so that he might become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him his daughter Michal for a wife. But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. Let's stop there for a second. All right, so the custom, it's sort of gone out of our modern-day culture, but usually when a man would ask a father for permission to marry his daughter, he would also give what's called a dowry, a gift to the family. It's some people might want to think it's like that's the purchase price of the bride. Well, it's in a sense, yes, but not in that sense of he's buying the woman, right? In that way. But it's a dowry gift that's given to the father of the daughter and to the family. And David says, this is why usually royalty marries what? Other royalty, right? For several reasons. One, political alliances, but also a princess is not cheap. So it's going to take a good dowry gift to give the father of the future bride. And so David recognizes he's a poor man. He doesn't have anything to give as a dowry for Michal. But so Saul says, okay, you don't have to give me a gift. All you got to do, so this is the gory part, right? It makes us uncomfortable. But the purchase price was 100 foreskins, right? We all know what that is, right? So you don't get those at a store. You got to kill people to get that, right? So Saul thinks that he's going to go off into battle. David will have to go get these 100 foreskins, and he's hopeful that David will be killed in the process. When he's going out to get this bridal gift for his daughter, that's the way it happens. Now, what did David do? He got twice as many as he needed. Right? He went out and doubled the gift. Saul set the terms. David doubled the gift. Right? It's not coin. It's not monetary value. It's not gold or jewels. But he doubled the gift that Saul had requested. And he was successful. And this is why Saul is becoming even more concerned about David, right? Because everything that David does, he prospers, he succeeds. Saul thought he set up the Kobayashi Maru, which for you Star Wars fans, that's the unwinnable event, the unwinnable battle. It's a no-win situation, right? So he thought he set that up where David would get killed, but David comes back and even prospered in that, right? Doubled the gift. And so now David has the gift to give to King Saul, and what does Saul got to do? He's got to give him his daughter now, otherwise he's going to lose face, right? He thought he had him set up, but in the end, David was successful, thanks be to God, and through God, right, that he was able to do that. And so now Saul has to follow through and give him his daughter to be his wife. Now, he's hopeful, right? Saul is hopeful that when there's a woman in David's life, that maybe she'll start to vie for his attention, right? Maybe she'll keep him a little tired when he goes off into battle, so he won't be able to perform as well, right? And through that process, that he's going to get killed in battle, right? That's Saul's desire. So he uses his servants. Now notice Saul's not even talking to David directly, really, too much anymore. He's using intermediaries, his servants, to go back and forth. So the servants came and told David. David said, okay. He went out along with his men and killed 200 of the Philistines. He brought back their foreskins and were given in full number to the king. And that he might become the king's son-in-law. So Saul gave him his daughter, Michal, for a wife. But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. So now, not only do the people love him, but his own family, right, love David. Right? You know, Saul's thinking, well, certainly my daughter's going to be loyal to what? To dad, right? Loyal to dad, love dad, but no, she loves David, and this enrages Saul even more. And he was even more afraid. So Saul sent David, so Saul was David's enemy continually. Then, the princes of the Philistines came out, so verse 30. Then the princes of the Philistines came out to battle. As often as they came out, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was highly esteemed. So again, submit a conclusion here. Anytime David goes off into battle, David succeeds because God is with him. His spirit is upon him. He's the instrument that God is using to accomplish his purpose. David is growing in stature in the eyes of the people. And we've heard the song of the women earlier, and it's just going to get worse. Right? The singing and the praises of David are going to increase and increase and increase. And as that happens, Saul gets crazier and crazier and crazier. Right? He's going to try to kill David more and more. Now we're going to skip over chapter 19. We could read it. I don't know why they're skipping it, but I guess because it's a story about Jonathan and David. But and anyway, it recounts Saul's plan on how to kill David. So how long is chapter 20? Give me a second, please. It'll be close. All right. And Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David, and Jonathan told David, Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Now we're in chapter 19, by the way. I'm sorry. And Jonathan told David, Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Therefore, be on your guard in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to my father about you. And if I learn anything, I will tell you. And because they have this close personal relationship. And Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his deeds have brought good to you. For he took his life in his hand, and he struck down the Philistines, and the Lord worked a great salvation for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without cause? So Jonathan is pleading David's case, right? Proverbial case with his father. And he's using some strong language. You know, Dad, David hasn't done anything to you. He hasn't sinned against you. Why are you sinning against him? And Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore, as the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan reported to him all these things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. So Saul says, I'm not going to do anything to David. And then there was war again. And David went out and fought with the Philistines and struck them with a great blow so that they fled before him. Then a harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand, and David was playing the lyre. And Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul so that he struck the spear into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. So while Saul has said he's not going to do anything to harm David, this evil spirit is causing him or leading him to seek to kill David. Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him, right, that he might kill him in the morning. So now not only is he trying to kill him at home, he's go to his house. Right? Wait for him to come there, and if he comes, we're going to come and kill him there. Right? Things are getting pretty bad. But Michal, David's wife, told him, if you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. So Michal let David down through the window, and he fled away and escaped. Michal took an image and laid it on the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair at its head and covered it with clothes. This would be the three pillows in the bed trick. And when it's biblical, by the way. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, he is sick. Then Saul sent the messenger to see David, saying, bring him up to me in the bed, that I may kill him. And when the messengers came in, behold, the image was in the bed, and with the pillow of goat's hair at its head. Saul said to Michal, why have you deceived me thus, and let my enemy go, so that he has escaped? Michal said to Saul, he said to me, let me go, why should I kill you? Now, that's not quite the way it worked, right? But that's what she told Dad. You get the idea. She might be a little concerned for herself, her own safety and well-being. Now, David fled and escaped, and he came to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and lived at Naioth. And it was told Saul, behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. Then Saul sent messengers to take David, and when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying and Samuel standing at the head over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. When it was told Saul, he sent other messengers, and they also prophesied. And Saul sent messengers again and the third time, and they also prophesied. You kind of get the idea God's at work here, right? Protecting David. Everybody that Saul sends to do harm to David, they end up doing the opposite. Then he himself went to Ramah and came to the great wall that is at Succoth, and he asked, where are Samuel and David? And one said, behold, they're at Naioth in Ramah. And he went there to Naioth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God came upon him also, and he went. As he went, he prophesied until he came to Naioth in Ramah. And he, too, stripped off all... So evidently, at this time at least, in this place, you were a naked prophet, right? He stripped off all his clothes that he, too, prophesied before Samuel, and he lay naked all that day and all that night. Thus it is said, is Saul also among the prophets. So Saul is continuing to try to seek David's life. We've seen how Jonathan has tried to intercede for David. We're going to see that again as we move forward. And God is at work to protect David, not only physically from the enemies of God's people, but also from King Saul, or more importantly from King Saul, because he is the next king. Right? All right, chapter 20. Then David fled from Naioth and Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, what have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life? And he said to him, far from it, you shall not die. So Jonathan is speaking to David. Far from it, you shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? Is it not so? But David vowed again, saying, your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he thinks, do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, pages are sticking together, sorry. But a step, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death. So David thinks what? He's on death's door, right? It's imminent. He's concerned, and he doesn't even think that Jonathan will be able to help him anymore because his dad knows about their relationship. Then Jonathan said to David, whatever you say, I will do for you. David said to Jonathan, behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit at table with the king. But let me go that I may hide myself in the field till the third day at evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the clan. If he says, good, it will be well with your servant, but if he is angry, then know that harm is determined by him. Therefore deal kindly with your servants, for you have brought your servants into a covenant of the Lord with you. So that covenant that we read about earlier was a covenant between them and Yahweh, which probably involves what? A sacrifice. Because you kata a berith, you cut a covenant. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself, for why should you bring me to your father? And Jonathan said, far be it from you. If I knew that it was determined by my father that harm should come to you, would I not tell you? Then David said to Jonathan, who will tell me if your father answers you roughly? And Jonathan said to David, come, let us go into the field. So they both went out into the field. And Jonathan said to David, "The Lord, Yahweh, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow or the third day, behold, if he is well disposed toward you, shall I not send and disclose it to you? But should it please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan, and more also if I do not disclose it to you and send you away." So basically what he's saying is, God is my witness. If I don't do this, God can do it to me. More also, if I do not disclose it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety. May the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die. And do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. Jonathan is still talking. Okay? So notice, he's the one saying these things. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die. And do not cut off your steadfast love from my house, the house of Saul, right? When the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies." And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Then Jonathan said to him, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed because your seat will be empty. On the third day, go down quickly to the place where you hid yourself when the matter was in hand, and remain beside the stone heap. And I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, and as though I shot at a mark. And behold, I will send the young man, saying, 'Go find the arrows.' If I say to the young man, 'Look, the arrows are on this side of you, take them,' then you are to come. For as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the youth, 'Look, the arrows are beyond you,' then go, for the Lord has sent you away. And as for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever." So let's stop there for a minute. So, Jonathan enters into an agreement with the Lord, with David and the Lord, saying that he will do everything in his power to let David know what his father is thinking. They set it up so the new moon, the feast of the new moon, was a time when the royal court and evidently the commanders of Saul's army would gather together. They would have a meal together to celebrate the new moon. And then David is concerned because of Saul's attitude toward him, so he's going to not go because he's concerned for his life. Jonathan tells him, "Look, I'll tell Dad that you went home, right? That you went back to Bethlehem because you have this annual feast that you celebrate with your clan, and hopefully he'll be understanding. But if he's not, if he's upset about that, then I'm going to let you know. Either way, I'm going to let you know." And they work out a plan of how he's going to notify David, right? That's what we just read about with the arrows. So he's going to hide in the field by this particular stone heap, and Jonathan's going to shoot arrows, and he's going to say to his servants the code words, they're on this side of you or they're beyond you. And that information tells David what to do. So David hid himself in the field. And when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food. The king sat on his seat, as at other times, on the seat by the wall. Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. So, 4 men. King Saul, his son Jonathan, Abner, who is the commander-in-chief of the Israelite army, and then there was David's spot. And so it's easy to see an empty spot when there's just a few, right? If it was a room of 100 people, it might be easy for one person to go unnoticed. But when he's sitting, when the spot's empty and there's only 4 people at the table, you notice. Yet Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, something has happened to him. He's not clean. Surely he is not clean. Okay, so this was a ritual meal that they were having. So by clean, he means he's ritually unclean. He came into contact with a woman, a dead body, a Gentile, something. Right? So Saul's oddly enough, right? Saul's putting the best construction on this. Surely he's not clean. That's why he didn't show up. So he doesn't get upset the first day, the day of the meal. He chalks it up to there must be some reasonable explanation. But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty. Now notice that if you were to read the book of Leviticus, which we'll be getting to in about a month or so in our People of Word reading program, if you became ritually unclean due to some contact with something, you could become ritually clean at the end of the day when you took a bath, right? So the next day, Saul says what? Where is he? He presumably took a bath last night. If he was unclean, he's now clean, so why isn't he here at the table? Right? So this wasn't a single meal. These feasts usually last some time. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, "Why has not the son of Jesse came to the meal, either yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered Saul, "David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Let me go, for our clan holds a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away and see my brothers. For this reason he has not come to the king's table.'" So David, being the youngest of the sons of the 8 sons of Jesse, he has to do what? He presumably has to be obedient to the eldest son, right? So Jonathan spins a story to Dad about why David is not there. It's something they agreed upon. David and Jonathan agreed upon earlier. We add a little. He adds a little information about the brother, commanding him to be there. Then, so Saul hears the news. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die." Then Jonathan answered Saul his father, "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" But Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. And Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David because his father had disgraced him. So, notice now that the rage, the effect of this evil spirit is spreading in Saul's life. So not only is it David now, his own son he's trying to pin to the wall with a spear. He's trying to kill him because he recognizes, Saul knows that this bond that Jonathan has with David, the bond between the two of them, Saul believes is actually stronger than his feelings for his dear old dad. Now, if you tried to kill your offspring, they might not want much to do with you, right? So Jonathan is going to flee from his father David, and he's angry. He has righteous anger from the standpoint that he knows that David has done nothing wrong to warrant this reaction from his father. But Saul speaks the truth. Did you catch that during his diatribe? He calls him a perverse, rebellious son of a perverse, rebellious woman, and that you've chosen the son of Jesse to your shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness. For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established or shall be established. So notice what Saul just confessed. He knows that David is the next king of Israel. And he's trying to convince his son, look, you should seek his life too, because you won't become king if he's alive. But Jonathan recognizes that David has done nothing wrong. He's done everything that Saul, his father Saul, had asked him to do, and that Yahweh is with him. So, in the morning, Jonathan went out into the field to the appointment with David, and with him a little boy. And he said to his boy, "Run and find the arrows that I shoot." And the boy ran, and he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the boy came to the place of the arrow that Jonathan had shot, Jonathan called after the boy and said, "Is not the arrow beyond you?" And Jonathan called after the boy, "Hurry, be quick, do not stay." So Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master. But the boy knew nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. And Jonathan gave his weapons to his boy and said to him, "Go, carry them to the city." And as soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. And they kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. Then Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, because we have sworn both to us in the name of the Lord, in the name of Yahweh, saying, the Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever." And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. So, King Saul tries to kill his son Jonathan with the spear. Jonathan leaves, and then he does what he promised he would do. He goes to let David know the outcome, or where King Saul is at with his feelings toward David. He does he shoots the arrows. He tells his servant to go get the arrows, and he utters the phrase, "Are they not beyond you?" Or is the arrow not beyond you? Which was the code word, quote unquote, code phrase, to let David know that Saul is seeking his life and he needs to flee. So, Jonathan calls his servant back to him. He gives him his bow, his arrows, and all of his stuff, and he says, "Take it back to the city." And then he and David have a tearful, it's not a reunion, it's the opposite of a reunion, a separation, right? A departure. They know that David has to leave, and so notice that David genuflects himself to Jonathan. He bows his face to the ground 3 times out of respect love and respect for Jonathan. They hug each other, they cry on each other's shoulders. Again, this was a very close relationship between these 2 men. And they know that they're not going to be able to see each other anymore, right? David literally has to flee the kingdom because Saul wants to kill him. And what happens next as we read through the next chapters of Samuel, we're going to hear about these events of Saul trying to hunt David down, right? His hatred of David is so strong that he's going out he hears reports that David might be somewhere. And so he sends forces to that place to try to find him and kill him. Right? His desire to keep power is so great that he's going to do abominable things. And he's going to continue to be upset with his own son as well. But David and Jonathan, their bond together is so great that they're weeping that they're not going to be able to see each other and be with each other anymore. Okay? Not in the way that the world thinks about that phrase, as we mentioned earlier. Right. So, before we wrap up for today, are there any questions about the story that we read today about David and Jonathan? Hearing nothing. Okay. That's okay. That's all right. Just clearing a throat? All right. Or a question? All right. And a cough. Right. Right. He recognizes, presumably, but because the Lord has revealed it to him, Jonathan recognizes that David is a unique and special person. Now, whether he realizes at this point that God has selected him to be the king, we don't know that. We can't say that definitively, but it is such that he gives him his own robe and his own armor. And armor's not cheap. This is an expensive thing, and presumably this armor was given to Jonathan by his dad, right? More than likely. And so, the entire Israelite army was, their knees were knocking and they were quaking in their sandals, and the little young shepherd boy goes out and slays the giant, right? But they have this intense bond with one another. They've entered into a covenant with Yahweh, saying that that they're always going to treat one another well. And not only just one another, but their household, right? So David, as we move forward through the narrative of Scripture, David in the end is going to do everything that he can to not harm Saul or Jonathan or anyone in their household, anyone in their family, even though Saul is seeking his life, right? David has, as you read through, these won't make it into the top 120, but if you were to read through the next few chapters, you'll see that David has opportunities to take Saul's life, right? And it would be legitimate because it would be self-defense, right? That Saul is trying to kill him, but David spares King Saul because David says, this is the Lord's anointed. This is the anointed one of Yahweh. He's the king, and I will not lay my hand on him, even though he has the opportunity. So David's respect for Saul's position as the king of Israel is high. Right? He holds him in high regard, even though the tables aren't, that's not a two-way street. So Jonathan has this, the two of them have this bond with one another. They've entered into a covenant with Yahweh, how they're going to treat one another and their families. And this will remain true as they go forward. So we'll do a little side story for a second. If you enact a coup d'etat, which is you lead a rebellion to overthrow a government, what do you do with the government, the governmental family members? Everybody, right? You don't leave a single solitary person alive. Why? Because they might come back into power, right? And we're going to see the opposite of that with King David. Jonathan has a younger brother whose name is Meshibabeth, who's lame. He fell and hurt his ankle. He can't really walk very well. And David gives him a position of honor in his house. He eats at the king's table all the days of his life. This is how serious David is about this covenant that he enters into with Jonathan. Normally, you'd wipe out every member of the royal family, so no one can come back and start a coup d'etat later on. But David doesn't act that way because of the covenant that he has with Jonathan. So next week, we're going to continue on, and I'm trying to think of what the name of the next week's story is, and I'm drawing a blank, but it'll still be in Samuel, but we'll stop there, and hopefully you'll be able to join us next Sunday at 9 o'clock for our Bible study class. For those worshiping, joining us via our YouTube channel, we thank you for participating today. Hope you can come back next week, and don't forget our worship service starts at 10:15, same YouTube channel. All right, that's it for this week.